Welcome to a sunny, wintry scene in Hong Kong, and welcome in particular to the Faculty of Law. We're delighted to have quite a lot of people with us, both in Hong Kong, in other parts of mainland China, in Europe, and we think in North America. So thank you very much. If your time zone is uncomfortable and inconvenient, thank you very much indeed for joining. I'm Paul Lejeau. I'm the director of the LLM program in corporate and financial law, and with me is my colleague, Siren Johnson.
Hello. Yeah, again, I want to second Paul's greeting to everybody for joining. My name's Siren Johnston. I'm the Executive Director of the Master of Laws in Compliance and Regulation. What we're going to do today, it's an orientation session. A lot of you, all of you, are thinking about applying and have a number of questions about the application process and what the courses are about, what it's like studying at HKU. And so what we're going to do, the structure of today is we're going to give a broad introduction to being at HKU generally. Paul is going to tell you about the CFL program. I will tell you about the CR program, and then we'll come back to some common application questions. At the end, we'll have a Q&A session. So for those of you not so familiar with Zoom, I think these days everybody is familiar with the online environment. There is a chat function. Please do use that chat function to prepare some questions for us, and we will try to address them as best we can once we get to the end of our session. Paul.
Good. Thank you. The reason we're here together is that there is something of a history and an interplay between the two programs, and we'll try and explain that as we talk about the content of each. They share a common origin. They are the most popular and the most competitive programs in the law faculty's master's suite, if you will, and they've become quite well known, not just in Asia, but in other common law jurisdictions and other centers around the world. What we'll try to do is to explain what we do, how that might be of interest to people like yourselves with different professional or academic backgrounds and different interests, whether they're professional or vocational or something that's purely scholastic. So what we'll do in the next hour and a half, 2 hours, is to give you as comprehensive as possible an introduction to the kind of thing that you can expect if you're lucky enough to join us. I should say also we're joined by a colleague who's behind the camera, for the moment at least, and that's someone who's important to both our programs. Daisy Lai is a senior administrator who really takes care of all of the running of our talk postgraduate programs. So Siren and I will talk largely from an academic and principal point of view, but if there are any questions later that deal with administrative aspects of what we're talking about, we've got good professional support here from Daisy as well. Essentially, there are 5 things that we want to cover, and we're very much led by your needs and agenda in this kind of context. The first is to talk about what you'll find in studying law at Hong Kong U and why that might be something that you'd favor in comparison with other law schools, for example. The second thing we'll do is to talk about our respective programs. We'll then try to give you a clue as to the kind of thing that we would expect as you apply to enroll in either the compliance or the CFL programs. We'll then talk about our expectations of you as possible future students. And then we'll hear, I hope, as many of your questions as we have time to cover in relation to any aspects, broad, specific, detailed, controversial, anything else. So you have our names, which is the next. Let's go on to talk a little about who you all are as attendees. We always have a mix in these programs, not just in terms of applicants, but also candidates and those enrolled. And we'll say something about that in more detail shortly. As far as those attending online today is concerned, there's a mix of local residents in Hong Kong. Some would be potential part-time students. They have a professional background. Some would be graduating or recent law graduates who are becoming almost certainly into a full-time master's program. They have backgrounds which vary. We looked at some of the information that you've given us in the last couple of weeks. People from law firms, people in commercial practice, lawyers acting in-house, people in government or regulatory agencies, and many people above all in commercial or academic backgrounds. Some of you are current law students, either here in the mainland, in Europe, or in North America. The important thing to say just at the outset is that it's a mix. And in terms both of what the law school expects and of what our two respective programs expect, we're used to that kind of amalgam of different interests. Everything we do is catered for a heterogeneous group, as you would be, for example, if you were joining us today. The second thing to say, and this is an important point, and I know from experience that it'll come back when we respond to your questions, which is that in these two programs, only a minority of you will have a formal legal background, a formal legal training. It'll be a minority who have a law degree. And that's because we admit to these programs a combination of law students, graduates, people who've studied or practiced law, but also people whose professional backgrounds and interests qualify them to deal with the kind of postgraduate work and research and writing that you would expect of any serious global program. So that's the kind of thing that we're pleased to see amongst you today. Let's talk for a few minutes about the two programs together. I may not look as if I've been here for 20 years, and in fact, I've been a director here for only about 5 or 6, but the CFL program has a long history. It's been going in its present form for something like 20 years. Over a period, it expanded. It drew increasing numbers of students from outside Hong Kong, from outside Greater China, from not just Greater Asia, if you will, Southeast Asia, South Asia, but Europe, North America. And the reasons for that is that we've been able to develop a world-class reputation for instruction, for scholastic endeavors, for research. We compete, if you will, with a comparatively small number of law schools in other parts of the world. In North America, there may be 2 or 3 law schools with similar kinds of programs to this. In Europe, there may be 4 or 5. In that context, our reputation has built up, and we expanded such that 5, 6 years ago, we created, and Siren being the founding director, a compliance program which gave a different angle to the kind of thing that our finance and commercial law students would be looking at. So we now have 2 programs which in some respects are very distinct. They have their own unique character, they have their own student base, which differs to some extent, but where there are certain common themes. The first is that for each program, you will, as a full-time student in 1 year, as a part-time student in 2 years, need a certain number of courses completed to graduate. We talk about 8 courses or 72 credits, 9 credits per course. The second thing is that the way in which courses are chosen by our students tends to be something that overlaps. In other words, there will be several common elective courses that you will choose. So a compliance student, for example, might find themselves being taught by someone like myself with a principally CFL focus, sitting in a room, a lecture theatre with other students from different programs. The entrance requirements are almost exactly the same. Common entrance requirements, which are basically stipulated by the university and the law school. So they are no different. The standard that we require of students for entrance, whether they are currently finishing their final undergraduate year at law school, whether they are seasoned professionals, people looking, for example, to enhance their career prospects or go through some kind of professional or academic change, something of that kind. People who've never thought before about some kind of postgraduate work. All of those things would be treated exactly the same way, the same kinds of basic requirements, all of which are explained in detail online. And the choice that you have is to engage in full-time study, which means that you would graduate within a year, or part-time study, which means you take 2 years of being with us. So from that base of common objectives and principles, we can talk about certain distinctions. And this is something which really might better come from Siren, because the reason for creating the compliance and regulation program was something which to a large extent reflects developments in the financial and corporate world.
When we go back 10 years ago, the problem of compliance was that there are not enough professionals in the industry to service the increasing demands. There were constant calls from the industry participants and the government in Hong Kong and elsewhere that there needed to be some other route to provide persons with appropriate experiences in compliance and regulation beyond, for example, coming through the traditional routes of being a lawyer, moving into this kind of field, being an accountant, or coming from the industry itself and familiar with the processes. So this is what drove the launch of the CR program. So it's now 6 years old. We'll be moving into our next year coming up soon. And one of the points that Paul's wanting to make here is that CR and CFL have over a period of time that, let's say, the overlap between them has gradually been getting less and less as CFL continues its development going forward and as CR continues its development along its unique pathways, looking for new courses, new teachers, and indeed recruiting slightly different groups of applicants to the programs who come from slightly different backgrounds, as we will talk on a little bit further as Paul talks about CFL in his segment coming up, and as I talk about CR in my segment thereafter.
So we have common roots, we share certain things in a curricular form, certainly in terms of expectations, qualifications. We differ in terms of the background of our students, and as Siren says, something which has been developing over the last 3-4 years. For example, there is a stronger content in the compliance program of professionals from the local Hong Kong market, people of different backgrounds, but all with some kind of either existing or expected professional career in regulation and compliance. So a larger proportion of part-time students compared to those in the corporate and financial law program. The second thing to say is that because the CFL program has rather more full-time students and is presenting itself as a program which offers quite a considerable amount of scope for people who see their futures in an academic setting, that's something which changes the composition of the enrollment as well. So looking at the numbers for the entry that we experienced in September 2020, there was a total enrollment in the CFL program of 66 people, of whom 43 were part-time, the remainder full-time. In the CFL program, slightly more, 72 new students, of whom 64 were part-time and only 8 full-time. That kind of balance is something that you could probably expect to see persist over the period of your studentship if you are successful in coming here. If we include the students who entered 18 months ago as first-year part-time students who are now in their second year, that means that we have a total enrollment, a student body, if you will, of 134 currently in the compliance program and 120 in the CFL program. These are the largest of the taught masters programs that Hong Kong U offers. We have something like, I think it's 300 students altogether in about 6 or 7 programs. These two are the ones which have the largest contingent respectively. I'd like to talk about the CFL program for a few minutes. And I thought I'd begin by showing you what this space looks like in normal times, by which I mean not necessarily Saturday afternoons, but also no pandemic, audiences, this kind of thing. This is the setting for our faculty conference room, where we have lectures and guest lectures and conferences, not just from people from the faculty or other universities in Hong Kong, professionals, people from government, people from regulatory agencies, but obviously, given the status that Hong Kong U has globally, academic professionals and others from all around the world. In a normal year, we'd probably have 2 or 3 events in this room, all relating to financial, regulatory, corporate kinds of subjects. It's a significant focus of the faculty's activities. And this is something which is, in a way, we've been teaching partly online for a year now. So it's actually quite nice to see a room full of people. I'd like to say something about the importance of financial law, if I may, and thinking about not simply those things which are obviously related to finance, but those things where the law and an understanding of the law informs the way that finance works, acts as a foundation, if you will, to financial or corporate activities. And to the extent that we have a mission for our students in the CFL program, it's to try and give a foundational understanding of how the law affects and influences and directs the way that these kinds of commercial activities work. This is this morning's Financial Times, the weekend FT, something about the vaccine, something about fake news and stuff like that. There's a number of other things here though. Comment column on the back page, the Lex column, some of you will know, talking about US banks releasing capital. They're taking funds that they allocated to reserves because of fears about loan losses due to the pandemic. And they're now saying that they're releasing those funds back to be used either to buy back shares for shareholders or pay dividends, or maybe higher salaries for some of the bankers. All of this is something which is partly directed by US regulation. And it can be controversial. In another setting, for example, within the EU and post-Brexit UK, banks have been instructed during the pandemic as to how they can pay or not pay dividends, which affected, many of you will know, the way that HSBC has performed in the local market here in the last 12 months. These are all things where the law influences and in effect directs commercial behavior. It's not simply that we have rules and the rule of law, it's that the law presents a foundation for financial activity. And that's something which is a simplistic point, but it's basic to the way that we look at aspects of the law. There's another point here about Bitcoin and funds, investment funds, which might invest in cryptocurrencies. How does that work? How does that differ from conventional asset management transactions or conventional securities? These are all things which we need to consider from first principles. And that's the kind of thing that we do here. Corporate conduct, the way that governance works, the way that rules are interpreted, all of these things have a, again, foundational aspect. And it's these things that we try at this postgraduate level to discern, to deconstruct, and in effect, to criticize or to recommend reforms. We're looking at law and finance in a particular context. We're looking at how academic law relates to the real world. We're looking at the way that innovation takes place. How does the law affect new things, things that didn't exist 5 years ago, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's fintech, aspects of regtech, things that demand an institutional setting in order to work fairly for individuals, for companies, for investors, and to provide fairness in terms of overall governance. We're looking at ethics, commercial conduct. Those of you who were working as professionals during the global financial crisis maybe became used to being accused of being crooks and people exploiting other aspects of commercial or economic life. The bank became a symbol of power, of corruption. Bankers became individuals who might be, spotted in the street and thought of as being malign characters. All of this gradually passes, but the reasons why conduct and the ethics of conduct are important in what we do is fundamental to the way that finance works, and whether it works effectively for all of us as commercial parties or as ordinary citizens in our economy. So all of these things are important. We look at the regulation of markets, how that affects commercial conduct, and we talk about all of these things in a very importantly transnational context. If you come to Hong Kong U, you're going to be studying in a setting which is unique in terms of the law having a juxtaposition between common law principles, the kinds of things that you find in the UK, in Australia, New Zealand, to a large extent in North America, and the way that mainland China law in a commercial context has developed in the last 2 decades or so. We can have an insight into that kind of juxtaposition. The relationship between international transactions, international law, all of these things are critical to what we do. Can we go on? Our program structure tries to reflect each of these things. Students coming into the CFL program have a basic choice of orienting themselves towards one of 3 kinds of specializations. The courses they take will overlap, but it's possible for different people with different interests to have those different stresses in the way that their program is composed. The first and most obvious one, perhaps, is a finance orientation. We need to go back one. And this can be a range of things, highly technical. It can comprise traditional aspects of law, banking law, for example, the taking of security collateral. It can be quite modern, quite up to date, international securities law, the law relating to fintech, for example, these kinds of things. We will look at topical issues, both in local law, regulation, and on a transnational basis. The second focus will be with corporate governance and corporate conduct, both internationally, where Hong Kong tends to look to other common law jurisdictions. But we're interested in this context in how a particular strand of interest has developed in modern times in the region as a whole and in the mainland as well. The final thing is a more specifically mainland context, and that is with aspects of banking law, corporate governance, and finance in China, looking again from a comparative point of view, studying something in Hong Kong with a broad approach to academic work. The final thing to say about course composition and program selection, if you will, is that although what we do, what we offer here, both for full-time and part-time students, is not intended to be a vocational, work-related or career-focused endeavor. Clearly, many people they do master's programs, take higher degrees in order to enhance their resumes, to facilitate some kind of career progression or career change, for example. But the courses we offer are academic. Whatever you make of them, we're not training you for anything except a broader mind, a broader awareness of law and finance in that kind of context. So we'd encourage you to look around, to take courses from related programs, not just compliance, but from other more general kinds of things. The way that things are specifically composed, you can look at very specific, very detailed interests, or you can be more broad in what you do. Let's go on to the next slide for quickly jump. The program is composed of really three and a half elements. The first is a clutch of 4 compulsory courses. One you must take, a course called Law of International Finance, which I lead, and then you must choose 1 or more courses from other compulsory options, which you can see here. Regulation, corporate governance, certain aspects of corporate law in China. You then have a choice of others, up to 35 to 40 elective courses, which are all listed on our website. And then 1 course, we call them capstones. Many of you will be familiar with that whole concept, as a way of concluding your studies, a course that brings together certain aspects of what you will have learned throughout your 1 or 2 years with us. And these can be in relation to securities law, mergers and acquisitions, things related to very current topics, for example. So again, within these specializations, considerable choice as to what you can expect and can do. Most of our courses are taught by faculty members. We have visitors from different parts of the world as well, and we make extensive use of experienced professionals. 2 of my courses I teach with people who are in practice in-house or in firms of leading solicitors. So we're informed from a range of things, and we hope to offer back exactly the same kind of blend. I'll stop there and hand over to Siren. We can talk about more specific things if you have questions later.
As I mentioned before, the program was launched 6 years ago in response to the needs in the business sector. There was a point in time when compliance was really a part-time job, sometimes undertaken by persons junior to senior management, sometimes persons who were in the legal department, sometimes it was a back office audit processing function. But what's happened is that the compliance function has moved really from being an afterthought, and it's moved into the corner office. It's something now that CEOs need to think about more carefully than ever before. And that then requires us to start to think differently about what is it that shapes the regulation? How does it change over a period of time? What are the forces acting on it to cause it to impose new requirements on the financial services industry? And these are forces which are not just arising domestically, but they're what I call global tectonic forces, things that cause all leading jurisdictions to move in a similar direction to each other. What I want to move on to then is what it is that you will be doing as a student on the compliance and regulation program. The most important thing is to recognize that our intake of students comprises a variety of persons from different kinds of backgrounds. So we have people from the industry itself, we have people who come from the regulatory agencies, from the stock exchange, we have people from the back office, from the front office, we have people who are coming from IT departments. The reason for this change is because the way compliance is needed to respond to regulatory developments has also changed. There's a much more complex technological environment that we need to cope with now. Since the 2008 financial crisis, there's also a different emphasis which is placed on senior management responsibility. So we have new regimes in place now. For example, in Hong Kong, we have the manager in charge regime. In the UK, it's our manager in charge regime is rather similar to what they've done in the UK, the senior manager regime. And what this is doing is it's placing new kinds of responsibilities on senior management more broadly than ever before. So for example, while the conversation 10 or so years ago would have been, should a head of compliance be subject to some kind of regulatory licensing requirement, what we now have is these regimes which require that person to be subject to some kind of regulatory oversight. So now in Hong Kong, for example, if you are a head of compliance, if you are a head of an IT function, then you're actually going to be subject to potential liabilities. In some parts of the world, those liabilities extend to things like clawback mechanisms, which means that you may have acquired a bonus last year, you've left the job, but guess what? That bonus can now be clawed back from you under certain circumstances. These are just some of the changes that have happened. And so what that's meant, coming back to the course composition, is that we now have a very broad intake of people from the financial services industry who need to get a much more, let's say, 360-degree perspective on what it is that compliance involves and what kind of regulatory drivers there are that change that task. Importantly, compliance is, it's a workflow, it's an outcome. And so one of the other things that CEOs think about is, well, how do I go about procuring compliance as an outcome? How do I make it happen? It is one thing to learn the law and study case law and to understand experiences, but it's another thing to understand the dynamics that actually make things happen at the coalface of industry. Things like, how do I know what regulations affect my business practices? How do I identify problems and how do I correct problems? How do I self-correct along the way? What kinds of compliance mechanisms do I need to put in place that deals with this? And these compliance mechanisms range from technical to human behavioral factors. So these are some of the things which we cover in various courses on the program. Reflecting that, the courses on the program are taught by a variety of persons. So obviously, many of the courses are taught by our full-time academic staff here at the Faculty of Law. Importantly, though, we also have a number of courses which are either taught solely by or co-taught with a full-time member of staff, where it's an adjunct professor who has come from the industry or from a practicing law firm or from the regulators themselves who come to teach the students their perspective on what regulation and compliance means. One of the things that's also happened over the past, let's say, decade or more is the growing body of case law that we need to come to grips with. There is so much more regulatory action in the marketplace these days than what there was, let's say, 10 years ago, that one of the important things to understand is how to manage the relationship with the regulator. The regulator is in a unique position of power in relation to persons who need, for example, a license to undertake some activity such as dealing in securities or corporate finance or asset management or whatever. So by bringing in adjunct professors from the industry, we actually get very different perspectives on that shed light on the topic of regulation and compliance. What happens in the classroom is many of the courses actually involve group coursework. Now, because what happens in the group coursework, you will be working perhaps in a small group of 2 or 5 fellow students to address some kind of problem or to analyze and present some case, is what will happen is you will find yourself interacting with people in a way that's not dissimilar to the kinds of interactions that actually happen in the industry. So in the industry, you find that dealing with regulatory and compliance matters requires the coordination of, for example, persons from IT, persons from sales and trading, persons from research and from corporate finance. For example, these people all speak different languages, and it's important to be able to shift your frame of reference to that other person's frame of reference in order to achieve a group outcome. And I think one of the benefits of a lot of the group coursework that takes place on our program is actually to give students this kind of immersive experience of what it is actually like trying to work with other persons from different kinds of backgrounds. Paul has already mentioned some of the other benefits of studying here, and that is we have a very active institute here called the Asia Institute of International Financial Law, so ifl.com. Please take a look at the website there. And we have a number of public events, things that the law faculty are doing, often in this particular room that we're speaking in now, often in a much larger room that we call the moot court. I think that houses something like 150 or 200 people, and they're quite interesting events to attend. The program's been running for some years, so what it now means is we've actually got a growing body of alumni, and these people have gone back into industry, back to the regulator, back to their law firm, and this body of alumni is now actually, I think we're around about 300 now. And I think one of the benefits of the program is actually joining that body of alumni and getting networked into that grouping. Our students, I have a slide here, which I hope that we can read. But what we'll see there is that I think the most notable thing here is that some of you will be concerned about is the law grads and non-law grads. So we're looking at a number here, which is 23% will have a law degree, about 77% will not have a law degree. One of the things that we introduced 3 years ago was a course that starts right at the beginning of semester. It's free. It's non-credit bearing, and it's specifically designed for non-law graduates to get an orientation as to what it's like to actually study law, how to think like a lawyer, how to read cases, how to read statutes, how the court system is put together, how various bits of the law will interact in relation to the kinds of things that you will study on the program. In fact, that quickly became popular from the first year it was launched, not only for the non-law graduates, but in fact, law graduates also attended that course. They found it to be quite a useful refresher, and also useful because it was directed toward the specific needs of this program. The point of the course of that particular course is so that when we get to the point of starting the semester, persons without a law degree are not somehow hampered by the fact that they don't have a law degree. In fact, the students coming in will have different qualities. It's great to have a law degree, but it's also great to have the industry experience, which tells you how things are kind of working out there in the city. One of the differences, I think, between the CFL intake and the CR intake is actually the kind of experience that students have. There's a little bit more emphasis in the CR program on how much industry experience you've actually had. So I think the number we've got down here is typical years of industry experience, around 3 to 10. That's a pretty kind of fuzzy number. I've had persons on the program who for example, I had somebody who was on a market misconduct tribunal, one of our bodies which is part of the system of our regulatory framework here, who has been in the industry for something like 30 years. But 3 to 10 is gets probably around about 80% of our part-time students. And it reflects the kind of interests that they will bring into the program. What your commitment is as Paul has mentioned, is 72 credits over 8 courses. Typical thing that happens is for part-time students, you do 2 courses over each of 4 semesters to give you the 8 courses in total. Full-time students will simply do 4 courses in the first semester, 4 courses in the second semester. Class sizes vary from between around about 20 to 30 students up to the largest classes will be in the order of around about 90 or 100. And the teaching method will vary accordingly. So for the smaller classes, they will be highly interactive. There will definitely be elements of coursework, as I've mentioned before. For the much larger classes, it'll be primarily a lecture-based format. So when you go and have a look at the kinds of courses that you might want to do as part of the program, please do bear in mind that different sizes will have different kinds of teaching techniques. We are well aware that different students also have different preferences in terms of what they want to get. Some students prefer the lecture format. Some students much prefer the highly interactive format. One of the things that I always tell students, not only who are thinking about applying as you are, but also students who have successfully applied and are enrolled in the program, is to look at courses on the program not as a means of pursuing their favorite topic of interest. So for example, if somebody's doing a job in, let's say, anti-money laundering, don't just go and do a course. Don't look for courses doing anti-money laundering. You know that stuff. Look for courses which are going to broaden your horizon. Look at the program as a whole. Don't just look at the 1 or 2 courses which have an exciting title. Look for courses which are going to bring you benefit over a much longer period of time. As with the CFL program, the CR program is also structured. So we have different categories of courses. The first one that you need to be aware of is the 2 compulsory courses that are normally done in the first semester, in the first year of study for part-time students, or in the first and second semester for the full-time students. 2 compulsory courses. In addition to that, we have 7 or 8 which is called core compliance and regulation courses. And for those, you need to do at least 2. You can do more if you want, but you need to do at least 2. We also have 2 categories in addition to that, namely the capstone courses and specialized topics. And for each of them, you must do at least 1 course. So if you do the minimum, you've got 2 plus 2 plus 1 plus 1, that comes up to 6, which means you have space for 2 more courses. Now, those remaining 2 courses, as I said, you can take those from any of the other subcategories that I've mentioned, or you can take them from any other course that's being offered by the law faculty. So that allows you the opportunity to just go and do something which is kind of interesting and a little bit random. So moving on then to our semesters and courses, please do have a look at the website. It has a list of courses which are on offer. If you click on any of the course titles, you'll actually be able to see a brief description of the course. One of the things that I often recommend people to do when thinking about the program and thinking about what courses to take is to have a look at who's teaching it. Most of the people in the faculty have written academic papers. Most of the people who are coming from industry have industry profiles. Have a look at those people, understand the things that they're thinking about, the things that they're writing about, the things that they're doing, and that's probably going to help you to find the right kind of match of course that's going to fulfill the purposes for which you're wanting to do the program. One final thing is to mention about prerequisites, and it's something that I think students have been gradually getting the message more clearly over the years is that certain courses have prerequisites associated with them. So for example, one of the courses I teach is securities regulation, and that comes in part 1 and part 2. It's a requirement. If you want to do part 2, you have to do part 1 first. It's a prerequisite. There's a number of courses like that which have a prerequisite, and the reason that it is there is very much because the second course builds on or assumes that you know a certain body of information. The concern being is that if you were just to do that second part of the course, it might be quite difficult for you to keep up and a challenge to cope with the demands of the course.
I'd like to talk about your application and what we expect of you, but I think the time has come for a little bit of truth. Both Saren and I, we're academics, but we both have professional backgrounds. Before we came to Hong Kong, Saren was a solicitor in practice and then in-house counsel. I was a capital markets banker, a coverage banker. And therefore, we both know what it is to make a marketing pitch. And the truth of what we're doing here is to try and draw you to Hong Kong. We'd like you to come to Hong Kong U rather than go to Duke or Harvard or Edinburgh or Cambridge or NSU. We say we're better for these reasons. And the best way we can illustrate that is to try and tell you how hard it is to get in. So as part of that, what we're doing here is sharing some clues as to how best to approach the application task, but also to say you really need to be on top of it because your competition, not just those 124 others who are on this call this afternoon, but those from other kinds of realms who apply later. The intake that we were fortunate enough to attract in the year that really the whole cycle began 12 months ago, but those people that came in September last year was somewhat lower than normal years. The pandemic reduced the capacity of all people, I guess, to cross borders, made people a little hesitant perhaps about a new venture. So our numbers were somewhat smaller, but not hugely smaller. So as you'll see here, we had something like 550 applications that were qualified. In other words, people that met the on-paper requirements for the programs. That compares, I suppose, with something like the mid-600s in a quote-unquote normal year. Of that 550 or so, we admitted 138. So it's something like, in the current year, a 25% success rate. Usually, it's something somewhat under 20%. So it's not easy to get in. It is feasible. If your qualifications are good, if you look to us to be interesting, we will undoubtedly see you as ideally suited to coming to Hong Kong U. But you need to be clear about why you're coming, the things that you tell us in your application, in order not only to distinguish yourselves in, if you like, an empirical way with transcripts and references and so forth, but to project yourself in a way which makes us understand your motives and places you each in a position where we can see you fitting. That's the kind of thing that we're looking for. And so the rest of what we're going to say in this context deals with the nature of the application form. Let's go one more slide on. All the details of what we require are on the faculty's website. We'd urge you to check everything carefully. Try not to send us an incomplete application. These things sound obvious, but they're always worth remembering, because if there's a choice, for example, between giving a quick acceptance to one person as opposed to another, the person whose application package is totally complete may get some kind of inadvertent preference. By complete, what I mean is not that things are missing, but that, for example, the full documentation may not be present in the package in the way that's required. So certified copies of transcripts, formal references, these kinds of things. It is a competitive process, and given the numbers of applicants that we have, we would encourage you very strongly indeed to make the deadline, the application deadline, which for both programs is the 1st of March. There have been exceptional times when we've listened, particularly in the last year, for example, to people who've had unusual reasons for a delay, but the delays are very small and they're very exceptional. We would like you to meet the deadline, please, as a kind of demonstration of commitment. One or two of the things that I'd like to say, I guess, are clues as to what should come. Basically, the application is a fairly simple thing. We're looking for your qualifications, we're looking for transcripts, professional qualifications. If you have any publications history, for example, we're looking for a usable understanding is what we would like of your employment history and any relevant internships. If you were the swimming captain in your school, or if you led the a cappella choir at law school or university, that may not be something that's quite as relevant for the idea that you clerked for someone in the courts in your home jurisdiction at some point. Things that are relevant, tell us that. Things that will support your application, not everything in your life. In that context, we ask you to give us a personal statement. And please, we would love you to do that in a way which is original and based on your own thinking. Tell us why you'd like to come here. Please don't Google best personal statement. Please don't rely on the LLM application homepage, because the result is that we see hundreds, literally, of applications with the same thing. My passion since I was 4 was for the law and postgraduate law. I always wanted to study in Hong Kong. Please don't say that, because our eyes get foggy. Tell us why you wish to be here. Tell us why it's important to you. That's really what we want to know. And don't break the word limit, please. We'll need, those of you who haven't studied for the complete 3 or 4 years of an English medium undergraduate degree, will need to take an English language test. Your competence in that, all of that is explained on the website. We'd also ask you, please, to give us 2 references from people who can make a judgment about your capacity to undertake a taught postgraduate program. Now, that may be someone who is your current or past employment colleague or boss, somebody who promoted you to a new job, somebody that you worked with in the past. Ideally, it'll be someone from an academic setting. So instructors, lecturers, professors who know your work or knew it when you were a student and can speak in a way that's authoritative. We know that some of you will not have been back to university for some time, and it may be that your contacts are somewhat distant. But if you can, please revive them. Think about people that were influential when you were studying, people who know your work. It's that kind of thing that we would look for. If you can give us academic references, that is ideal. We would look at others, but we want people who can make a judgment, not to say, Siren is my best friend, we've worked together, you know, we go running together, we do things, you know, we evidence of friendship. What we're looking for is someone who can make an assessment, ideally from an academic point of view, if necessary from a professional point of view, but for this particular purpose, okay? Finally, some people think that they can increase their chances of getting in if they apply for both programs, or indeed if they apply for several master's programs. That is not an accurate judgment. You can, if you wish, apply for more than one program. But if you're doing that, please tell us why. We'd like to know, because it's an indication of commitment. You may be a starred first-class honors 4.0 GPA graduate. You may have a stellar background, the youngest ever partner at Goldman Sachs, the most promoted figure at the Hong Kong Monetary Authority or the People's Bank of China. Whatever it may mean, we would like you to explain your motives in applying not just for these programs, but for others, because it tells us something about what you're saying. And by coincidence, if we read a personal statement where it says, my heart is devoted to the CFL program, and then we turn the page and we see my heart is devoted to the Master of Common Law or the compliance program, we will kind of think, well, this is sketchy. This isn't quite what we're looking for. So just think it through. You can apply for more than one, but tell us why. Our expectations in terms of what we're looking for you are very simple. We want the best. We're competing for the best students, not just in Hong Kong, in Greater China, in the Asian region or Asia Pacific, but throughout the world. We have student bodies from North and South America. We have people from Europe. We have, even in these difficult years of travel, cross-border studentship is not easy, but people come here because our expectations are high and our standards are high, and we offer world-class curriculum. So we're looking for academic excellence from you because that's what we offer in terms of our programs. We're looking for those of you with a professional background, substantive experience. People who are clearly poised at that point in their career to move from middle to senior roles. People for whom this kind of experience will be valuable in that transition. People who are intellectually curious, people who may have been away from formal academic study for some time, but they think, you know, I'd like to do some research. I'd like to do some reading. I'd like to do something which may be prompted by the lockdown in different jurisdictions. Maybe I've had a chance to think about where I want to go. Intellectual curiosity is good for us. All of these things not only will help us choose you as candidates, but will help you excel through the program. Once upon a time, to be cynical, it used to be a minority of people, even the most successful, the top 5%, the creme de la creme of graduates would go on to postgraduate study if they weren't considering an academic career. Now it's very common. Lots of people have master's degrees. So we'd like you to distinguish yourself both in applying and while you're with us, and we will commit to offer something back which you'll be able to say on your resume, this is something which is world-class. I think that's really all. There's a couple of things that I'd like to say. The context is an unusual one because the pandemic has changed all the ways that we work and study and assess our students. So we will hope that by the time you come here, if you're successful in enrolling, that we'll be offering a normal, that's to say face-to-face learning experience. From this point a year ago, most of our courses clearly were being taught online through Zoom or through other online functions, Teams and so forth. In the first semester, September to December, a small minority of courses in the university as a whole were taught face-to-face. In the semester that's just beginning now, a proportion of our classes and courses, both small and large, will be taught either face-to-face or in a hybrid fashion, with some people who can't be with us taking part online. So the mixture is one that you would understand from all similar settings, other law schools.
Well, in fact, Paul, just to add onto that, I've just been having a look at some of the Q&A, and this touches on the question that's being raised in some of the questions, and that is, the simplest way to answer the questions about the online environment is at the present point in time, what we are planning for is to is for a normal teaching semester starting from September 2021. That's what we're planning for. Whether or not that happens, who knows? I think one of the points that Paul's trying to make is that the HKU has actually been responding extremely well to the pandemic situation, in terms of we've been quite flexible to understand different people's travel restriction requirements, for example, which in some instances, a few instances, has not only impacted on the student, but it may also impact on a lecturer who's stuck somewhere else and is having difficulty coming back to Hong Kong with quarantine requirements and so on. So we've responded to what I would like to call the pandemic chaos reasonably well. But so far as the applications go at this point in time, we are all assuming September 2021 is normal. If there are variations on that, we will be able to cope with it. Otherwise, let's hope that things do get back to normal.
We've changed the certain aspects of the way in which we assess course results, for example, to follow with that, very much in common with other law schools and universities in common law jurisdictions. So there's been a degree of flexibility, in not just in the way that we instruct and engage with students, but also in the way that they're assessed. We can talk about that in the Q&A session. One point of detail that we'd like to mention briefly is a scheme which comes from the Hong Kong government. And this is something that Siren's more aware of than me, because it's been operating in the compliance program for a year.
That's right. So in 2020, the Hong Kong government introduced a fellowship scheme that basically was looking to promote programs in Hong Kong that it saw as being consistent with the priority areas of Hong Kong's development. Programs which it saw which is developing innovation and new techniques in terms of teaching that relate to areas, in our particular instance, the business sector, amongst others. So last year, the Compliance and Regulation Program was fortunate enough to be selected as one of those programs. And in the coming year, 2021 to 22, both the CFL program and the CR program are recipients of this fellowship scheme. Now, the way the fellowship scheme works is as follows, and the first step is the most important. You must apply and be accepted into the program. Once we have a body of students who have been accepted into the program, then eligible students will be contacted as to how to apply for the fellowship scheme. The main benefit, the quantifiable benefit of the scheme is that you can actually get up to 120,000 Hong Kong dollars reimbursed to you from your tuition fees. The qualitative benefit of the scheme is that you will then become part of a group of fellows who will be able to interact on a little bit different basis with the various members of the faculty on different kinds of projects. And what we hope, well, first of all, let me say before what we hope is that the quota for the scheme is quite limited. So in the coming year, it is 9 for the CR program and 6 for the CFL program. So it is competitive. It is only available to eligible local students. But as I said, the process for choosing the fellows is a process which happens after the application. It is a separate and independent exercise. So there's no consideration in the application process as to who might be a fellow or not. In the application process, what we're looking for is the best and the brightest. Once we have that group of people together, coming from different backgrounds, looking at the overall blend of students in a particular program, be it the CFL or the CR program, once we have that blend, then we engage a new process where we then invite the eligible students to apply, and that will be explained at that point in time. It's basically goes through a brief application process as to why you think you might be worthy of the fellowship, and an interview which follows after that prior to selection. What we hope is that the fellows of the CR program or the CFL program will actually be flag bearers for the programs, that they will go back into industry or into academia and actually promote the values of the programs. And that's pretty much, I think, you know, an appreciation of the extent to which financial law and regulation is intimately wound up with how society gets along, how the economy performs, whether we're going to have another crisis, whether the bank is behaving itself properly in terms of the way that it treats its customers, financial stability, and so on. And so what we're looking for with this fellowship program is not just giving some money back, but it's also hoping that we can get fellows through who will then go on to become leaders in their respective fields. So it's something to look out for at the appropriate time. But reminder, step one, apply, get into the program. And just on that topic, one of the other questions I saw as you were talking, Paul, was that there's some questions here about the competitiveness. What's the competitiveness or difficulty or statistics of getting into the program? And I think that comes back to the slide we had a look at before with these very salient numbers, 554 applications to the programs, whereas only 138 enrolled. So that's kind of a bit less than 1 in 5. Historically,
it's something at or just under 20% of applicants. In the year that's we're in now, something like 25%, because the total number of applicants was somewhat depressed. We'd expect the numbers to increase again. So about 1 in 5.
Yeah, I think that's around about the lifelong figure.
Let's go on to questions,
I think, yes.
shall we?
Yeah, I think we can go on to Q&A now.
There's a slide that we included which talks about your life at Hong Kong U, but in a way that's a topic that can go on forever. So we'll jump towards the end. You'll see an image that has 2 QR codes which you can use to access our respective websites. And there's very detailed information that you'll be able to see in both cases. So let's go through these.
So a couple of these questions we've already tried to address, I think. So let's just run through some of them very quickly that we can knock off quite quickly. In view of the pandemic situation, is HKU offering online courses? Answer, no. We're planning for a normal resumption. If it turns out that we are pandemic affected, then we're going to be flexible. And for example, the semester which has just passed, we have indeed have some students who have taken the entire course, but not the entire program, the entire course from some other jurisdiction. Things have got better. And so the semester that we're starting up in about 2 weeks' time has courses which are a mix of online and face-to-face. In short, one should not assume that this is an online degree learning program. It is not.
Could we share the typical range of experience of the student body? We talked about this a little bit already. The 2 programs differ in certain respects because CFL has a larger proportion of full-time students, and they tend to be people who've recently graduated, either come straight from graduation or maybe have 1 or 2 years of modest experience. Otherwise, Siren's broad estimate, the range of between 3 and 10 years experience, it really is difficult to go beyond that. We look for substantive experience. So you'll see in terms of qualifications for both programs, we look for at least 2 years of real experience for those of you who don't have a law degree, for example. There are people in the program currently in recent years with a significant amount of experience, much more than 10 years. But the range tends to be something between 3, 5, and 10 to 12, that kind of range. Partly because people, quite often they start work, they gain some experience, they gain a certain standing before they think about coming here. And that's probably a practical approach to the kind of thing that we expect of people. Working part-time, doing a job in a difficult setting, then coming here mainly for evening lectures, it's hard work. It demands a lot of your commitments. So we tend to look to that kind of range, people with a body of experience which is real, not trivial, but can be certainly in single figures. 2 is the absolute minimum.
Well, yeah, just to clarify that, we do have students who, for example, go through an undergraduate program and then apply to come and join one of our programs. And I think that's something which we do take on board, students of that nature sometimes. And is that not the case?
No, I'm saying the full-time students, something like a third, 30 to 35% of the CFL student body is full-time students, and they will, most of them will come straight from graduation, some with an interval for reflection. But they won't have had, they may well have had fascinating and valuable internships, but we won't take those into account in terms of professional experience. They're part of your life experience, if you will.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to clarify, I think, in terms of the little bit of a difference between the two programs is that there, as Paul mentioned earlier, there are more full-time students on the CFL program and comparatively fewer full-time students on the CR program. The number of full-time students on the CR program has actually been increasing year by year, so it's probably a trend I think that will continue a bit. But in terms of the years of experience, I think the emphasis might be expressed like this, and that is that on the CR program, we do take some people in who have simply come directly from an undergraduate degree of some sort, typically that would be a law degree, and then are applying to come into this program. Whereas in the CFL program, they will perhaps have more of those kinds of applicants or enrollees than what we would on the CR program. The emphasis on the CR program is a bit more on you've done an undergraduate degree, you've gone into industry, maybe you've got some professional qualifications which are relevant, and you've had a few years of experience in the industry, and you're bringing that experience into the classroom together with your prior academic learnings, and then contributing to the overall composition of the classes and the programs.
I have already left school after a couple of years, lost contact with academic field. Can I submit 2 professional references? Yes, but we're not looking for a professional reference. It might come from a professional person, someone that knows your work, but then we're looking for a serious judgment as to whether you're suitable for the kind of work that we do. In other words, academic work. So you'll be helped if you can make what might be a significant effort to get an academic reference. We will accept professional references, but they've got to be relevant. It's no good just saying someone is good at work and participates in team discussions. If it's true, it depends on what you mean by a couple of years to the question. I've already left school for a couple of years. If it is a couple of years, I would really suggest you go back and warm up your contacts. If it's many years, we quite understand. We're flexible. This is our preference.
Well, I was just going to add to that. You would be surprised at how many academics actually will remember you. And if it's if it's just 2, 3, 4 years, don't just assume. Get back in touch with the person. People in academic field understands the importance of references to people looking to do another degree, and you will typically find a receptive voice. So please do look out for it, and don't just make the assumption. As Paul said, the concern is that if somebody's just graduated within the past few years and they have 2 professional references from their own company, or perhaps from their own company and from somebody they do business with, there are other considerations that are influencing the contents of that reference, which make the reference a little bit less gold standard. Let's put it that way.
To go from the ideal to this not so sublime, we had 2 applications for part-time positions in the CFL program in the last year, where 2 colleagues gave each other a reference. So, you know, something else is useful. Please, academic references if you can, but we're flexible in some respect.
The question here, did I understand correctly that one cannot apply for the CFL and the General Master of Laws program? Yes and no. The point that Paul was making was that we discourage you from applying for multiple programs simply because it looks like you are not really clear what it is you're wanting to do. It is a competitive application process, and it helps if you put yourself in our shoes a little bit, where we're looking at 2 different applications and we're deciding one of them can get in and one of them cannot. This one has applied to a few programs, this one has applied to 1. It says something about the applicant that they're quite clear in what it is that they're wanting to do and why. If you're in a situation where you're not really clear which program, then of course you can apply for more than 1 program. It's simply a factor that we take into consideration when we see somebody effectively hitting the application with a shotgun to see which one sticks best. Give it a bit of careful thought as to exactly why you want to apply for the program, and then that will usually come across in an application procedure.
There's some questions about the application procedure itself. What's the time frame for informing applicants if they're successful or not? The second question, certified copies of transcripts, or can I mail certified copies? All of the latter questions are all dealt with on the website, and there's an email address that you can use if you need anything more detailed. Much of our application process now is online, including the submission of references. The time frame, we close the books on the 1st of March. We would expect most decisions to be given by the middle to the end of May, including rejection, acceptance, or waitlist. So it's reasonably quick, but it's giving a specific date is something that we can't do because we don't yet know the numbers involved. Did you want to add anything, Daisy? Okay.
I think one of the points about certified documents, or in fact any documents from third parties, is that we understand that you can't control what third parties are doing. We generally discourage people from just holding on to their application until the very last moment because they can't get that second reference, or because they can't get that certified copy because they're waiting for somebody else. In that situation, what's better to do is to get in your application. If you have a copy non-certified of your transcript, include it, but write on it, awaiting the certified copy. Or write, I am waiting for a response for the second referee. Put that in. And then when you get that document from the third party, forward it in, marking it with the your relevant details to make sure the 2 documents are put together. Our administrative staff are incredibly efficient. I don't know how they do it. We have so many applications, not just for our 2 programs, but obviously for all the programs at the law faculty. But they put documentation together extremely well. So the point is, don't wait until the last moment. In fact, one of the other things that we wanted to bring to everybody's attention today was to not wait until 11:59 on the 1st of March. If you can get your application together in the next couple of weeks and get it in, get it in. The sooner the better. We do actually start looking at applications early in the process prior to 1st of March, but it's only really after the 1st of March that we start formulating decisions as to who to make offers to. So get them in early is good.
Grades and performances of the students in general, how many distinctions are there on average each year? There's 2 points I think we can make. The first is that the 2 programs that we run, the overall cumulative GPAs that we are used to seeing going back over a period of some years, certainly more than 5 years, is that in terms of letter categorizations, we are a step above the faculty average for postgraduate taught programs. So that's something like 0.3 in terms of GPA, higher than the average. So that means we would expect our students to produce something in terms of overall performance on average of 3.3, B+, that kind of thing. We tend to get between us something like between 5 and 7 distinctions each year. Acceptance rates we've had.
There's a question here going back, I think, to expand on something we've said before, is that 2 years relevant experience and professional qualification in a non-law degree admission required. That's not quite right. What's the qualification required? Let me clarify, and this relates to a question above, which is in terms of the average or expected academic results. The requirement is you have an undergraduate degree. We expect you to have a 2.1 or better. This is the main body of all of our students will satisfy that basic requirement. There are no particular qualification requirements for any professional qualifications or other qualifications beyond that undergraduate degree. We will obviously look at degrees, the relevance of that undergraduate degree to our programs. So a degree in transport planning will have different relevance to us as, for example, a degree in business administration, a BBA. So we will look at the kinds of degrees and we will look at the standard. There's no particular professional qualifications. The point that I was saying about professional qualifications, perhaps more so for CR than for CFL, is that when I read applications, I look at professional qualifications and I see a person who's continued to learn, who's continued to do more beyond simply the undergraduate learning experience.
Going on from there, someone has actually a very good question. This is the use of language in a way. I noted that at least 2 years relevant experience and professional qualification in a non-law degree admission requirement. What's the qualification? We mean by qualification professional experience. We mean substantive professional experience. If you have an additional professional qualification in the sense of an accounting or law qualification, yes, of course, that is taken into account. But we're looking for experience of a substantive kind in that context. Anything else? I think time frame.
There's a question here, I'm not sure if I've understood it correctly, is the question is there any scholarship which is provided to the LLM program? If yes, could you simply explain the application process of scholarship? I'm sorry? No. After you, Paul.
There is no scholarship program for there's no scholarship for these programs. There is one other master's program does have a scholarship scheme, the human rights program, but that's not the case here. What we discussed in relation to the very recent fellowship scheme is the only kind of concessional program or concessional scheme that affects our respective programs.
With the field of compliance and regulation developed for quite a few years now, is the market still an active demand for LLM graduates? Can you share any information examples, if available, of local LLM grads assimilating in the financial compliance field in China, given the difference in the legal systems? What I can do is talk about two examples. One is quite recently, it was just about 2 weeks ago, that a former student who is senior management in a private equity firm reached out to me, and they were looking for a junior compliance staff or junior/mid-ranking compliance staff. And rather than simply just putting the advert out there into the world or going through agents and so on, actually they came back to me and said, can I get this this advertisement out to the alumni of the CR program? And the reason that they are wanting to do that is because they know exactly what the alumni of the CR program have learned, the kinds of perspectives that they've gained. Now, the significance of that is that particular PE firm actually has, as is not unusual in this particular part of the world, a focus on China. That's the first example. The second example is a former student who was previously at a leading global investment bank, who, after studying the program, became particularly interested in new technologies, particularly crypto assets. And as a result of that, has moved on to join a crypto exchange. And it was kind of an interesting move because the position that they had at the investment bank is a position that many people would die for. But the person was sufficiently intrigued by crypto assets, inspired by the prospect of new technology, that they've actually gone over to a crypto exchange. So these are a couple of examples where students have clearly benefited from the program or interacted with the program in particular ways in terms of their career development. One of the things that we're in the process of building and developing, as I mentioned, we have around about 300 alumni at the moment, and they're mostly connected currently through social media platforms like WhatsApp and LinkedIn. And this is actually providing a good source of information for alumni to network with each other as to different kinds of job opportunities.
How much workload should I expect per week? For example, how many pages of reading, homework load, and so on? That's a very good question, and it's really difficult to answer because it will vary from course to course. However, there is a broad, I was asked this question 10 years ago by a student who ended up getting a distinction. And she said, look, I've got a part-time job and I'm a full-time student. How much time do you think I should spend in terms of preparatory reading and research for the course? And I said, well, let me think about it. And the next week we talked and I said, look, I think every course you'll have at least 3 hours of study instruction per week. And I think you should look at least that amount again in terms of background reading and work, and possibly up to twice as much. And she said, yes, that seems to me to be fair. And as I say, she managed to get a distinction. It varies from course to course. It varies from the time of the semester. But broadly speaking, you'll need to put in at least as much work on your own, possibly more, than you would actually in a class setting in terms of instruction. How much to read? It's impossible to say because it varies from course to course and it varies from the way that individuals behave. As much as possible, we would say, but that's not really a very fair thing. But as far as time is concerned, it's a big commitment.
Well, it is. And one of the reasons that it varies from course to course is because some courses, for example, they will have a significant class participation or coursework component that might require students to get together to work to solve problems. So this is not kind of reading time per se. It's actually time where you work in a group and you try to figure out how to address some kind of issue. There's two questions here which relate to the personal statement. One is, how should it be submitted? Answer, with the application form. There is no reason that that should be submitted later. Submit it with the application form. The other question is, why should I spend 300 to 500 words when I can express the answer in a single sentence or paragraph? Fine. Look, I understand where you're coming from. I tend to like to keep things brief. But what I would suggest that you do, and we do get personal statements, which is just simply a sentence or two. And frankly, if you put down a sentence or two, that's not going to result in your application going into the reject pile, okay? But remember, it's a competitive process. And when you put that one or two sentences down, you have to put yourself in our shoes. What do we know about the character of this person beyond the black and white transcript, the things that are said in the references? Maybe what you need to ask yourself is this: how did I come to have that sentence in my personal statement? What's led me to write that one fantastic encapsulating sentence as to why I want to do this program? There is a background to everything. There's a background to why you wrote that sentence. Just try to help us understand it a little bit, and that might decode for us who you are and give you a bit of a personality. Remember that, you know, it's a time of year when Paul and I receive on our desks on a regular basis, a few times a week, piles of paper which are this high, application. It's nice to find points within those applications which give them identities. And the personal statement can sometimes be a useful means of doing that.
I think also there's a broader point, and that is that even though in a world of artificial intelligence and contract drafting by machine and algorithm and machine reading and fintech and so forth, law is basically a written phenomenon. We'd like to see your writing because you're going to have to do a lot of it here. And both in exams and in this kind of setting, if we say 200 words, if you're in a law firm or you're acting as in-house counsel and somebody says, please brief me in 300 words, you probably need to do that. So it's a good exercise, you know, try it out.
Question on the fellowship. Do you need to indicate interest in being considered for the fellowship as you submit the application? Answer, no. As I said, when describing the fellowship, it is a two-stage process, and each stage is 100% independent of the other stage. Stage one, application. If you are able to get into the program, then we will write to the eligible local students and tell you how to apply for the fellowship if you are interested in doing so. So at this stage, don't think about the fellowship. At this stage, get your application together, get it in sooner rather than later.
Quite a few people asking about timing. So for example, somebody who would have 2 years experience at the time of starting the program itself, we'd be willing to consider an application, but it needs to be complete. So it may be that your experience is such that you'd be a better candidate next year, but it's really difficult to judge in a specific sense.
Okay, there's an important question here, and one that's critical, I think, to understand for everybody doing both programs is, may I know the usual class time for part-time mode? Let's ask the same question for full-time as well. And would the lecture slides be made available online in case I can't make it to class due to overtime work? Okay, so first of all, part-time classes are all held in the evenings, typically 6:30 to 9:30. Sometimes there are classes on Saturdays. Full-time classes are during the day. However, it is possible for full-time people to do the evening classes as well. It just depends on the schedule of the particular course. The course schedule is really mainly because we have so many part-time students, the course schedule is largely directed toward that evening schedule. However, certain courses are held during the daytime just for full-time students. So for example, one of the courses I teach it twice. I teach it once in the daytime for the full-time students, and I teach it once in the evening for the part-time students. As regards online slides slides, what if I'm late for work or something like that? Look, we understand what it's like to be a part-time student. I understand. When I did my master's in law, I did it as a part-time student. I was working as a trainee in a law firm and doing this. So basically my weekends were my master's degree in law. We understand that if you can't arrive on time, but let's be clear about a couple of basics here. If you are going to commit to doing an LLM part-time, you need to be aware of the commitment that you need to make to it. There is little point in applying and getting enrolled in a course if what winds up happening is every night you can't get to the classroom. What's the point? One of the problems that you may encounter is that we have a 70% attendance requirement. If you do not attend 70% of the classes, then the problem is you might not be allowed to sit the exam, which means you won't complete that particular course. So please give thought to your commitment and make good on that commitment, not only to us, but also to yourself. If it turns out on a particular night, you've got something that keeps you back at work, yes, we understand that that happens from time to time. In terms of slides, we use a system here called Moodle, and that's an online system where course materials, slides, reading lists, things like this are posted, and students will be able to obtain all that information from there. Now, I see that we are approaching 10 to 4, and so we're moving toward the time when I think we need to wrap up. So let's have a look. Are there any other interesting questions that you've seen here, Paul?
Just one quick point to add to what Siren was saying in terms of being present. Clearly, in the last year, we've been affected by the pandemic and the way in which online learning has become, in effect, the norm. But again, to repeat, to make it clear, it's a norm that we don't want to attach to. We do all sorts of things through online resources, but you can't expect to make this work as a distance learning program. It simply isn't feasible. So although enrolled students certainly will have the benefit of online resources, the library, course instruction, reading lists, these kinds of things, you need to participate by being here in order to be an effective candidate.
A couple of simple questions to ask here. Non-local student, can they reduce their workload to example 56 credits a year? And a related question is, if I'm too busy, can I defer my study? Again, I think that the main point to make in response to these questions is we are flexible, okay? We understand that people's life circumstances change, but again, don't enter the program with the expectation that this is how you're going to do it. That's not the way it works. The way it works is you enter the program with the commitment to comply with the requirements. No matter how friendly and generous Paul and I might want to be in terms of allowing all kinds of things, the fact is it's a university that has regulations that need to be followed. Some can be bent a little bit, some cannot be. So don't assume that you're going to join the program and then write your own regulations. Unfortunately, like most things in life, it just doesn't work like that. There is a plan of study, and that's what you are expected to join. A couple of questions here about visas and the fellowship and joining the CFL program. Have a look on the, if you look for the website for the fellowship program, if you simply look up TPG Government UGC Fellowship, then you will be able to find it. But broadly speaking, if you have a student visa, if you have an IANG visa, if you have a dependent visa, then you wouldn't be qualified for the fellowship. The other question a bit further down here is, I have a dependent visa. Can I apply for part-time CFL program? As far as I'm aware,
absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Many people do.
Fine.
Some of the best people do.
Let's see. So, oh, you don't have access to the questions anymore. Oh, I'm sorry. I was wondering why Paul was so quiet. So look, I think that with only a few minutes left, what we'll try to do is to have a look at any themes that come through the questions which haven't been addressed, and we will see if we can put up a few of these responses on the website when we post up the slides to this. Any remaining thoughts or?
No, I mean, many of your questions are perfectly good. And the university is a bureaucracy, so there are regulations for almost everything. We are sensitive to our applicants' preferences, experience, desires. In other words, if you are a good applicant, if you happen to have something which is a slightly unusual background, you're able to provide a very good, thorough, professional reference rather than academic reference. These are things that we will be flexible about. We will accommodate you if we consider that your application makes you suitable. It is competitive. We receive lots of good applications, but we won't be rigid in the way that we read these. Please just take into account what we've both said this afternoon in terms of our preferences and the things that will give you a successful path. The slides from this afternoon will be posted, if not today, on Monday, so that you can see all the things that we've said. It includes links to more detailed information in our respective websites, and we'll happily respond to other questions. If there are things that are important in the chat questions, we'll go back to those as well and post anything that seems particularly relevant to most people.
Yes. So there was one final question here, which I think is worth really briefly commenting on, and that is, do you have one brief sentence to describe the key differences between CFL and CR?
Do I or do you?
No, I think we can both provide a sentence for that.
By virtue of the title, there's clearly something somewhat more specific in the compliance and regulation program than the corporate and financial law. One is broader, one is less broad. I think there is, again, given that in the CFL program, you can focus on at least 3 different kinds of course choices, there is arguably the opportunity to study law in a more foundational way than with the compliance program, which is somewhat more applied. So there's an orientation that is somewhat more, not demanding, not difficult, but its focus is perhaps more towards aspects of theoretical and doctrine in terms of law. I don't think there's that much difference in terms of candidates. We both teach each other's students. In the course that I finished teaching just before Christmas, the top 2 grades, both A+ were compliance candidates, which gives me huge pleasure. These are differences in emphasis and composition. They're not radically distinct other than in the way that I described.
I would generally agree with all of that. I think that there is a little bit of a difference in terms of the composition of students, as I've said, with the composition of the CR program tends to have a little bit more of a heavier emphasis of students from the industry who are looking to go back into the industry or who are continuing in the industry rather. There's also, I think, because of the 2 compulsory courses which are unique to the CR program, so no CFL students do the 2 compulsory courses. Have a look at the description of those 2 compulsory courses, and what you'll see there is that there's a different emphasis on principles of regulation and how that influences global dynamics of financial market regulation. That kind of sets the direction of the ship in a different direction from the directions that you might take and set yourself on the CFL program. So look, with that then, what we have on the slide on the screen here is you have 2 codes and websites and some numbers and an email address. Use them. Can I ask you please to have a look at the websites, look through them in detail, hunt for the information that you're looking for there. There's a lot of information there. Please look at that in detail before you go emailing our administrative staff. As you'll appreciate, they're quite busy, and answering questions which are on the website is just time consuming. If you really have a question that, let's say, unique to your own circumstances, drop an email, pick up the telephone. But again, look through the websites, try to get answers there. And I think with that, it's a question of reminding you, 1st of March, midday, don't be late, be early, and good luck. I look forward to seeing your applications soon.
Thank you very much. We do this every year. We've been doing in joint introductions now for 3 or 4 years, usually in a very comfortable lecture theatre. So I think we should thank you not just for dialing in and offering some very good questions, but for remaining with us. A year from now, maybe we'll be back to having you sit in the audience for a similar kind of event for your successors. Please enjoy the process, even if applications seem awful to produce. We're looking for you to display your competence and interest. And we look forward, as Siren says, to reading your applications and to seeing many of you in September. Thank you very much indeed for your attention this afternoon. And thanks again, those of you who've got up in a difficult time.
Good. Thank you. Good luck.
Right.